Hello, I'm Rabbi Elton from the Great Synagogue in Sydney, and our personality today is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, born in 1902 and died in 1994. The Lubavitcher Rebbe was probably the best known and most influential rabbi of the 20th century. He was born in the Ukraine in 1902. His father was Rabbi Yitzchak Schneerson, a descendant of the Rebbes of Lubavitch, and in fact the young Menachem Mendel was named after the third Rebbe, known as the Tzemach Tzedek. Lubavitch is a part of the Hasidic movement or movements, but it is rather unusual in two respects. First of all, geographic. It was based in Russia rather than in Poland, and second, it was much more intellectual than the other movements, and therefore it placed much more emphasis on the individual learning and therefore the spiritual accomplishments of each individual member of the movement, each Chassid, rather than through the Rebbe himself. The young Rabbi Schneerson was taught first by a tutor and then by his father once the tutor gave up trying to teach him any more, and by the age of 17 had mastered the whole of the Talmud, many thousands of pages together with its commentaries. He moved with his father to another city where his father became the senior rabbi of the community, but then it became time for him to pursue higher studies. At this point he went to Warsaw and attended higher secular institutions, and where he married Chaya Mushka, who was the daughter of the sixth Rebbe of Lubavitch, the reigning Rebbe of the Lubavitch movement. They moved together to Paris, where Rabbi Menachem Mendel attended, amongst other places, the Sorbonne, and seems to have qualified as a scientist, as an engineer, and mathematician of various degrees. In 1940 to 1941, Rabbi Menachem Mendel and his wife escaped from the ensuing Holocaust, and they came to New York, where his father-in-law, who was deeply impressed both by his Jewish learning and by his more wider secular attainments, gave him a position of leadership in many of the Chabad, the Lubavitch institutions, which were now based and run from New York City. He became increasingly influential and important, and publications of this period include Hayom Yom, which is a collection of Chabad sayings and aphorisms, which are arranged according to the days of the year to be read one or two each day. In 1950, the sixth Rebbe died, and after some discussion and uncertainty about who would succeed as the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel was appointed in 1951. He demonstrated his willingness to become the Rebbe by delivering a mimer, a discourse in Yiddish on Hasidic and Chabad themes. As the leader of Lubavitch, he carried on many of his father-in-law's previous initiatives. For example, the sending of shlichim, the sending of emissaries to different parts of the world in order to bring Judaism and Jewish observance to communities in those places. Now there are many thousands of shlichim all over the world, many of whom were sent originally by the Lubavitcher Rebbe during his time at the leadership of the Chabad Lubavitch movement. He was also known for encouraging the performance of particular mitzvot, tefillin, the phylacteries worn by men, candles lit on Shabbat by women. He also encouraged the higher education of women, that they should be more learned in Torah than is often the case in Haredi communities. And he also created a sense of equality between rabbinic couples when they were sent together to be shlichim, to be emissaries in different parts of the world. He also placed great emphasis on the concept of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. This was an idea which began with his father-in-law, and which he also continued and stressed, the idea that acts of goodness and kindness and the performance of mitzvot, of Jewish commandments, will bring the Messianic age and bring the Messiah. He was relentless in stressing the importance of striving for the Messiah's coming each and every day, and perhaps unsurprisingly, a great deal of Messianic hope and fervour began to revolve around him personally, even though it's unclear whether he ever himself regarded that he was the Messiah or could be the Messiah. The Rebbe suffered his first heart attack in 1977, and towards the end of his life became very incapacitated, eventually dying in 1994. He and his wife had no children. She said that she regarded all of the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim as her children in some sense, but as there was no son and no obvious successor, there's been no eighth Rebbe of Lubavitch, and therefore he occupies a very special place, not only as an immensely important Rebbe, but also probably the very last Rebbe of Lubavitch. He had enormous influence on Jews all over the world. First of all, through the many emissaries he sent to different places, to those who became Chabad Lubavitch themselves and many who did not, And maybe the most famous of those is Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the late chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, who was deeply impacted by a visit to the Lubavitcher Rebbe he made in the 1960s. The Rebbe's extraordinary ability, particularly through personal meetings known as the Yechidus, through the exceptional power of his personality and his deep personal charisma, to inspire people, to lift them up, and to help them commit themselves to a life of service and life of Jewish practice and Jewish involvement and Jewish activity, marks him out as one of the truly remarkable figures of the 20th century Jewry. Many, many Jews around the world, whether Lubavitch or not Lubavitch, have been influenced by him and inspired by him, and his impact on Jewish life will continue for many years to come. Thanks for joining.